It had been raining for as long as anyone could remember. Not a heavy, violent kind of rain, just a steady curtain that fell softly, day after day, year after year. In the small town of Greycourt, people no longer checked the weather. They already knew what it would be. The streets stayed slick and reflective. The rooftops darkened with constant damp, and moss crept quietly up every wall. Yet somehow, life went on. Morning light still found its way through the clouds, pale but gentle. Shops still opened. The baker still lit his ovens. The old postman still pushed his bicycle through the puddles, a hood pulled low over his wrinkled face. Most people spoke quietly in Greycourt, maybe because sound carried differently in the rain, softer, rounder. Arguments rarely lasted long. Laughter came out hushed, but it still came. At the heart of town stood a small cafe called the Window Seat. Its name came from the single long window facing the street, fogged most of the time, but always glowing faintly from inside. Every morning, its owner, Mara, would unlock the door, sweep away the leaves that gathered at the threshold, and light the little lamps that hung above each table. She'd owned the cafe for 20 years. The walls were painted a soft yellow once, now faded to the color of butter left too long in the sun. A record player hummed in the corner, playing slow piano pieces that matched the rhythm of the rain. People came in mostly for warmth, not just from the coffee, but from the way Mara looked at them, the quiet way she noticed things, how she'd refill someone's cup before they even asked, how she remembered whose scarf was whose on the rack by the door that morning. Like every other, she stood behind the counter and watched the water slide down the window. The street outside was empty except for a boy splashing through puddles, holding an umbrella far too big for him. He stopped, stared through the glass, and waved. Mara smiled and waved back. The boy came in a few moments later, rain still dripping from his sleeves. His name was Theo, the son of the woman who ran the flower shop across the street. Every morning before school, he came in for a slice of toast and warm milk. He sat at the same table by the window, pressing his palms to the fogged glass. "Do you think it'll ever stop?" he asked. Mara looked up from the counter. "The rain." He nodded. She thought for a moment, then said quietly, "Maybe not. But maybe that's not such a bad thing." Theo frowned, trying to understand. Why? "Because some things stay the same so we can notice the small changes," she said. "The sound of it, the smell, the way it makes people stay close." Theo didn't answer, but after a while, he smiled, the kind of small, thoughtful smile children have when they don't fully get something, but they like how it sounds. Outside, the rain kept falling, soft and endless, wrapping the town in its calm. By afternoon, the town had settled into its usual quiet pulse. The rain had a rhythm everyone unconsciously followed. Work done between downpours. Rest taken when it grew heavier. Down the street from Mayra's cafe, there was an old man named Elias who repaired watches. His shop was small, tucked between the barber shop and a shuttered bookstore. The window display was filled with clocks that all ticked at slightly different times. Like a choir that never quite agreed on the beat, Elias liked it that way. He said, the sound of all those clocks together made the rain feel less lonely. Most days, he worked without customers. A cup of tea cooled beside his tools, and his hands, thin and steady, moved like they were guided by memory rather than sight. Sometimes he'd stop just to listen to the dripping gutter, the faint laughter from Mara's cafe, the hum of his clocks. He'd lived in Grey Court his whole life. He could still remember the year before the rain started, when the sky was sharp and blue and the air carried dust instead of mist. He missed that sometimes, but he also understood something most didn't say out loud. People had learned to live better since the rain came. No one rushed anywhere anymore. The roads stayed empty enough that children could walk down the middle, umbrellas twirling above their heads like small planets. Neighbors shared candles during power cuts. People lingered longer in doorways, waiting for the rain to ease before saying goodbye. That evening, as Elias locked his shop, he noticed Mara standing outside her cafe, staring up at the clouds. He crossed over, careful of the slick cobblestones, thinking of moving somewhere dry. He teased softly. Mara smiled without looking at him. No, just wondering if we'd even recognize silence if the rain stopped. Elias nodded. Maybe we wouldn't. Maybe that's the point. For a while, they just stood there, two old friends, sharing the same umbrella of noise above them. Across the street, lights flickered on in the flower shop. Theo's mother was arranging a new display of pale blue hydrangeas, the petals catching tiny droplets through the open door. Inside the cafe, a few regulars sat quietly, watching their reflections blur on the wet glass. Every corner of Grey Court seemed to breathe, in sync, slow, tired, but somehow peaceful as night came. The rain softened even more. Mara closed her cafe early and walked home through the side streets. Water pooled at her ankles, reflecting lamps like stars fallen into puddles. She didn't bother with her umbrella. The air was mild, and the steady drizzle felt like a kind of music. At her small apartment above the post office, she lit a single lamp, changed into dry clothes, and stood by the window. From there, she could see the entire square below, Elias locking his shutters, the flower shop closing, the wet cobblestones glowing faintly in the lamplight. She leaned her head against the glass. The rain whispered like it always did. And in that sound, there was something she couldn't name. Not sadness, not comfort, but something in between. Days in Grey Court blended into each other, softened by water and routine. Morning smelled like wet stone and coffee. Evenings hummed with the low murmur of rain against roofs. No one marked seasons anymore. The trees stayed green from the constant moisture, and the air always carried that cool, damp scent of something unfinished. Then one morning, something small changed. When Mara walked to the cafe, she noticed a patch of road that was dry. Just a small circle of stone, no more than the width of a table, but completely untouched by rain. The air above it shimmered faintly like heat, though the air was cold. She stopped and watched for a long time. The rain fell all around, steady and soft, but that one space stayed perfectly dry. When she opened the cafe, Theo was already waiting at the window, his nose pressed to the glass. "Did you see it?" he asked before she could even greet him. "The dry spot." "Mom said it's been there since last night." Mara nodded, still a little dazed. "Maybe the town just forgot to rain there," Theo laughed. "Can it forget?" "I don't know," she said, smiling faintly. "Maybe even rain needs rest sometimes." All day, people came by the cafe, talking about it. The dry circle in the street. Some thought it was the start of a change. Others said it was nothing, a trick of the wind, a patch sheltered by something unseen. Elias came in later that afternoon, water dripping from his coat. He ordered his usual tea and sat across from Mara near the counter. "You saw it too?" he asked. "I did," she said. It felt strange, like the world blinking. Elias stirred his tea, watching the steam curl upward. "People will talk for days. You know how they get. But I think..." He paused. "I think it's just the town reminding us not to grow numb. Even in sameness, something small can shift." Outside, the circle stayed dry. Children gathered around it, stepping close and daring each other to touch it. Some threw pebbles into the center, watching them bounce off as if hitting invisible glass. By evening, the sky grew heavier again. Thunder rumbled somewhere distant. The rain deepened to its usual, endless rhythm. And when Mara looked again before closing, the dry patch was gone. She stood by the door long after she'd locked it, staring at the wet stones glistening in the dim streetlight. It was almost as if the dry spot had never existed. But something in her chest felt different, lighter, but also uncertain. That night, she dreamed of walking down the same street. The rain falling backward, rising into the clouds instead of down. Everything gleamed, but no one seemed to notice. Only her, walking through it, trying to catch the sound of silence. When she woke, the rain was still there, soft, steady, endless, but her heart carried a quiet hum she couldn't explain. The next morning arrived like any other. The clouds hung low, and the rooftops dripped in rhythm. But the people felt different. It was small things, the way they lingered outside their doors a little longer, the way they spoke softer to each other. Mara noticed it first in her cafe. When she placed cups on tables, people smiled more often. No one seemed in a rush. The quiet had changed, not empty, but full, like something waiting to be understood. Theo came in, soaked, as always, his shoes squeaking across the floor. He sat at his window seat, unwrapped a piece of bread from his pocket, and looked out at the street. "Do you think the rain gets lonely?" he asked suddenly. Mara paused mid-step. "Lonely? Yeah," he said. "It falls all the time, but it never gets to stay anywhere." Mara looked at him for a long moment before answering. "Maybe it doesn't need to stay. Maybe falling is what it's meant to do." Theo nodded slowly, as if filing the thought away for later. Then he smiled, the kind of smile that warmed the whole window corner. Elias stopped by again that afternoon. He carried a small clock wrapped in cloth, one that had stopped ticking months ago. He placed it on the counter. "This one belonged to my wife," he said quietly. "I've been meaning to fix it. I think I'll finally do it tonight." Mara didn't ask why now. She just nodded, knowing the answer was somewhere between the raindrops outside. The flower shop door stood open, and the scent drifted through the wet air. Lilac, jasmine, rain-soaked soil. Theo's mother was laughing with a customer, her sleeves rolled up, hands covered in tiny green stems. It had been a long time since Mara had heard laughter that clear. Later that evening, the power flickered across town. It happened often. The rain played tricks with the wires. But this time, no one seemed bothered. Candles glowed in every window, turning the town into a sea of soft light. People opened their curtains instead of closing them. From the street, you could see families talking, neighbors sharing tea, someone tuning a guitar in the corner of a dim room. Mara sat by her own window, a cup of tea cooling in her hands. She could see Elias's shop from there. Inside, his silhouette leaned close to his workbench, the soft tick of a mended clock beginning again. And for a while, Greycourt felt alive in a way it hadn't in years. Not busy, not loud, just awake. The rain still fell, unending. But now, it sounded different. Less like sadness, more like breathing as she watched the droplets run down the glass. Mara felt something gentle settle inside her. Not joy, exactly. Not sorrow, either. Just the quiet truth that life would always be this way. Small, imperfect, and full of soft persistence. When she finally went to bed, the rain outside blended with her own slow heartbeat. And for the first time in years, she didn't dream of silence. Weeks passed, and Grey Court stayed wrapped in its endless rain. People no longer spoke about when it might stop. They'd stopped hoping for that, or fearing it. The rain had simply become part of who they were. The cafe still opened every morning, its windows fogged and glowing. Elias still mended his watches, each one ticking softly to its own rhythm. Theo still came before school, carrying that same oversized umbrella, leaving tiny wet footprints on the wooden floor. But there was a new ease in everyone now, a quiet that wasn't born of exhaustion, but acceptance. One morning, just before dawn, Mara woke to a strange silence. It wasn't complete. The rain was still there, but softer, almost distant, as if falling in another place. She rose, wrapped a shawl around her shoulders, and stepped to the window. The town below was silvered with mist. Lamps still glowed faintly in the fog. The sound of dripping water echoed from the eaves. Then she saw something, a faint break in the clouds, a thin, pale thread of color bleeding through. It wasn't sunlight, exactly. More like memory, the color of a morning she'd almost forgotten existed. She smiled. Not because she thought the rain would stop, but because she didn't need it to dot later that day. Theo burst into the cafe, breathless. There was a rainbow, he said, eyes wide. Just for a minute. Mara smiled as she handed him his cup of warm milk. Maybe that's all it needed to be, she said. He sat down by the window, looking out as the rain returned, steady and calm. Do you think it'll come back? I think, Mara said softly, that the rain just reminded us to look for color again. Theo nodded, watching the street. Then he said something that stayed with her long after he'd gone. I think maybe the rain isn't falling on us. Maybe it's falling with us. That night, as Mara closed up the cafe, she stood by the same window she'd looked through for years. The rain was there, as always, soft, constant, endless. But now she could hear the life beneath it. Laughter echoing faintly from the flower shop. Eliza's clocks ticking in gentle sync. The hum of people talking under umbrellas. She pressed her hand to the glass. It was cool, familiar, and for the first time, she understood the rain wasn't a burden they were waiting to escape. It was the thing that had taught them how to stay outside. The street shimmered under the dim lamps, every puddle catching a small, quiet reflection of light. And as the rain whispered against the town, Grey Court slept, peaceful, connected, and alive. Somewhere in that soft, steady rhythm, the sound fades into the dark, and all that remains is the quiet comfort of knowing, even when it rains forever, life still finds a way to glow.